Hello and welcome to this edition of The New Normal, the show that brings you the very best of France 24's reporting from our correspondents around the world. Today, we'll be taking you to Thailand, to Germany, to the Canary Islands. But first we start in Sudan on the border with Ethiopia. There, the government and NGOs are racing to build camps for the refugees fleeing the fighting in the neighboring Tigray region. An estimated 200,000 people are expected to cross the border in the coming weeks. Bastien Renouille reports from these camps that are filling at an alarming rate.
It's 5:30 a.m. These Ethiopian refugees wake up after a night spent on the ground without shelter to protect themselves. Some are waiting for a UN bus to transfer them to a new camp. They would give anything to leave the city of Hamdayet.
We are in the desert, you'll see. The night was so cold, but we only expect from the people, from the government, food and sheltering. Those things are basic and fundamental things to the person.
At midday, new refugees are arriving in large numbers. The region is particularly difficult to access. NGOs are slowly setting up and getting ready to help an increasing number of refugees. This organization quickly built latrines for several thousand people.
التبرز في العراء ده مشاكل جمة يعني حسي لو شايفين احنا من جينا الناس دي بتبرز في العراء كانوا فكل الحاجات دي بتنزل في الخور السكريتة دي بتنزل في الخور وبتنزل في المويه بتاعتهم اللي بيشربوها فدي بتسبب لهم امراض كثيرة حتى للناس الغاطنين.
Since the beginning of the conflict, Sudanese organizations started collecting funds from the local population.
هذه المجتمعات ساهمت مساهمة كبيرة جدا في مجال تغذية اللاجئين وطالبي اللجوء وبعد ذلك طبعا جاءت المنظمات استلمت هذا البرنامج منظمة WFP ومنظمة مسلم إيد.
5:30 p.m. a meal is being served for hundreds of people. This will allow them to hold up until they are transferred to a permanent camp. As the night settles in, temperatures are falling again. The Sudanese government is expecting that 200,000 Ethiopians could cross the border in the coming weeks.
Now to Thailand, where the working class is now joining the students in their months-long protest. Demonstrators want the Prime Minister to step down. Some are calling for a reform of the monarchy with a limit placed on the king's powers. That is unheard of in a country where lèse-majesty is considered a serious offence.
Every weekend since the summer, thousands have defied police and demanded the Prime Minister's resignation. High school and university students, mainly from comfortable backgrounds, started the protests, but they've been joined by ordinary people. They include DAMRI, a motorbike taxi driver who's been driving passengers around the streets of Bangkok for nearly 40 years. He isn't afraid to display his convictions, even at work. DAMRI, who earns about €300 a month, symbolises the wide gap between rich and poor in Thailand. He was part of the Red Shirt movement in 2010, when for 2 months, people from poor rural regions joined political activists to occupy Bangkok. But a decade on, inequality has worsened. Between 2015 and 2018, the number of Thais living below the poverty line rose by 2 million, according to the World Bank.
I live in a one-room apartment. It's 3 meters by 2.5 meters, a total of 7.5 meters squared. 3 of us live there. The poor live in slums, and you can see the skyscrapers built for rich people.
Damri wants Thailand to introduce a proper social security system. He says only a real democracy can bring about far-reaching economic and social change.
We are fighting against the dictatorship so that all people are treated equally.
The protesters also want equality for minorities. Anjali, a drag queen, is involved in the pro-democracy movement. She has to juggle working late at night with protesting in the evening.
Welcome to the Stranger Bar, everything, everyone, and everybody. We have a show at 9.
Backstage, Anjali touches on the movement's decision to confront the country's biggest taboo and question the king's powers for the first time.
I am surprised that the new generation was like need to reform the monarchy. They don't want to change. They just want to reform. It's illegal here to speak about monarchy. So it's like it's just strict, too much. We support to be open more about it, to be able to talk about it.
These are the biggest demands for social and political change Thailand has seen since the 2014 military coup. No one knows how the movement will shape the future, but it is already making history.
The Canary Islands are a small patch of Europe just off the coast of West Africa. And right now, the islands are facing a massive influx of migrants. 18,000 people have landed on the islands since the beginning of the year. Now, shelters are completely saturated on the island, whilst tourist hotels are empty, facing a massive crisis due to the coronavirus. Faced with this situation, the Spanish government has decided to kill two birds with one stone. It's a report by Anaïs Guerard.
Gran Canaria, hotels stretching as far as the eye can see, but only 10% of the island's 145,000 beds are occupied.
Debería ser plena temporada y cuando veo eso es para echar a llorar. COVID ya ha causado una crisis económica sin precedentes.
The ailing tourist sector has answered a call by the Canary government to help house an influx of immigrants. Managed by the Red Cross, 12 hotels are now putting up more than 4,000 Africans like this Moroccan.
قارب الموت فاش كنركبوا في قوارب الموت يعني راه حنا صافي معولين مديرين رجل في الدنيا ورجل في الاخره يعني خاصنا نوصلوا لواحد الهدف يعني الفقر هو اللي خلانا نديروا هادشي كامل هنايا لقينا كروس الروخه ولقينا يعني بنادم هنايا مستضعفنا على اكمل وجه يعني ما كنلقاوش شي حاجه ديال العنصريه ولا كنلقاو شي واحد كيشوفنا شي يشوفنا عطسه ولا شي حاجه كلشي كيتعامل معنا مزيان.
The local authority is paying €45 a night per person. It helps about a dozen hotel owners pay their bills while throwing a lifeline to needy immigrants. Like the Red Cross, the hotels aren't authorised to speak to us, so we have to film discreetly.
90% of the south of the island, the hotels are closed. There's thousands of people sleeping on a concrete floor. And as a hotelier, I'm able to get people back to work.
So it's a win-win system. Not as far as the Las Palmas Hotel Federation is concerned.
La acumulación sí puede ser un impedimento más de que personas vienen. Un empresario turístico tendrá que elegir, ¿abro para turistas o abro para migrantes? Y nosotros opinamos que tenemos que hacer nuestro trabajo inicial para que estamos, recibir y mimar a turistas.
This year, more than 17,000 migrants have arrived on the shores of the Canary Islands. A field camp was set up this week for the first time to give refuge to 700 people.
In Germany, migrants are caught between tough lockdown measures and an economic downturn. As a result, they can't find work and integrate into society. Our correspondent in Berlin, Anne Maillet, went to meet them.
You can't come in, you can't leave. This Berlin asylum center has been quarantined for a week now. Hassan tested negative for COVID-19, but he spends most of his time in his room.
Hier mache ich meinen Deutschkurs gerade. Es ist ein bisschen schwierig. Wenn mir schlecht geht, dann gehe ich auch einfach hier raus.
Another setback for a group of people especially hard hit by the COVID-19 restrictions. The pandemic makes integration much harder, says the center's director.
Wir haben Menschen, die normalerweise zu Präsenzsprachkursen gehen, die jetzt aber nicht stattfinden. Und nicht alle sind jetzt so internetaffin, dass sie über Video das machen können.
Around 20,000 asylum seekers live in such centers in Berlin. To keep them informed, the local refugee office puts out a podcast in 14 languages that hasn't spared them from the second wave.
In der ersten Welle waren das sehr wenig Menschen, die da rein mussten. Die zweite Welle erwischt uns schon, wie auch woanders in Europa, härter. Zusammen haben wir also rund 340 Personen, die im Augenblick als Kontaktpersonen, Familienangehörige oder als Positive betroffen sind.
And for those who have already found their place in German society, the situation is also precarious. Samer had to close his restaurant. He's managed to hold on to half his income thanks to a delivery service.
So jetzt kann ich kurz noch durchhalten natürlich, aber wie gesagt, so lange auf 6 Monaten zum Beispiel, ich hoffe nicht, aber auf 6 Monaten natürlich schaffe ich das nicht.
In Germany, the health crisis is slowing integration. Unemployment for refugees and asylum seekers rose 23% during the first wave of the pandemic.
That's it for this week's edition. I'd like to thank our camerawoman Armelco and our producer Agnès Lecosec. I leave you with these extraordinary images of a discovery in the antique city of Pompeii, Italy. The body of a master and his slave, killed side by side as they were fleeing the volcanic eruption that destroyed the city in the year 79. Only 1/3 of this remarkable archaeological site have been excavated at this stage, and that means there will be many more discoveries. In the meantime, please stay safe and stay tuned to France 24.
France 24, every art form.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.